Guntram Wolff, let's recap some of this past year's highlights in terms of Bruegel's research and policy contributions. Now, Europe this year is emerging from recession. How has Bruegel contributed to the debate about how best to drive economic growth in Europe?
Yes, I think one of the big topics of this year has certainly been the recession and the really poor growth performance in Europe, in the Eurozone, but also in many non-Euro area countries. We at Bruegel have been working a lot on the topic, both on the macroeconomic side, so what is the right macroeconomic policy mix, as well as on the more structural side. Of course, there's a lot of structural reforms that need to be done to get growth going, including in terms of entrepreneurialism.
And I think one of the places that we really need to start is by changing mindsets. Changing mindsets from trying to find a job to actually trying to create a job, and being proactive and finding ways to create new jobs, become entrepreneurs, be a more entrepreneurial society.
Georg Zachmann has worked on the emission trading system, which is a way Europe tries to tackle emissions of carbon dioxide and reduce those emissions in a way that is good for industry and good for consumers.
And the price pattern that develops really helps to reduce emissions at those point in time at which it is cheapest, in those countries where it is cheapest, in those sectors where it costs the least.
And of course, we have also worked on the ECB and on fiscal policy and have emphasized very early that the ECB should actually lower its interest rates and that the macro stance in the Eurozone was too tight. Rates, I think, should be cut by now because the economic situation has deteriorated significantly. We've gotten a number of very negative news on the labor market, on, of course, also the business sentiment, but also consumer sentiment and investment.
Going forward, there's of course intense debate about how to improve Europe's economic architecture. What have been Bruegel's contributions there?
Yes, I think the main themes this year were really completing and advancing the monetary union governance. So the key topic, of course, this year was banking union, but banking union has to be seen in the context of a broader agenda that was very much on the table, which is an agenda about banking union, fiscal union, and political union. And we have, of course, from the beginning said that banking union is not only a very complicated file, it's also a file that requires a lot of political commitment, a lot of also commitment in terms of risk sharing, in terms of fiscal policy. And our scholar Nicolas Véron has worked very intensively on this.
I think in a way banking union is a project that has to be thought of as a very long project, a multi-year project, maybe a decade. Banking union means that the whole framework of banking policy would be shifted from the national to the European level.
And the other big topic was the financial assistance programs given to several countries in the Eurozone and some countries outside of the Eurozone. We have undertaken a very systematic evaluation of what went right, what went wrong, and how the Troika should be reformed in a joint study with our former director Jean Pisani-Ferry and André Sapir and myself.
There was a lot of debate in the early days about whether the IMF should come in, whether there should be a purely European solution, or whether the IMF should come in. In retrospect, it's a very good thing that the IMF came, because they had the technology. They brought money, but first of all, they had the technology of dealing with this kind of situation that the Europeans didn't have.
And what about adjustment? What did Bruegel have to say about how to rebalance the European economy?
Adjustment in the Eurozone is one of the fundamental problems that we are confronted with. We have a lack of competitiveness in the south. There is a need to trigger the sources of growth and trigger demand in the north, in particular in Germany. And our colleague Zsolt Darvas has really worked very intensively on the question of the divide between the north and the south, and has recommended indeed that there needs to be a relative price adjustment and that also the euro could play a role in this.
There has to be a relative price adjustment between surplus countries like Germany and deficit countries like Italy and Spain. And if the overinflation is very low, then this means that inflation in Southern Europe will have to be even negative, so they would even need deflation. But if countries in Southern Europe have deflation, it will worsen public debt sustainability because it increases the real value of debt.
But of course, this is not just about prices, it's also about the structure of different industries in different countries. And we've been working very intensively on the manufacturing sector and to what extent the manufacturing sector can be a source of growth, a source of more jobs in Europe.
These technological opportunities, whether they will actually be translated into viable and sustainable manufacturing activities here, will to a large extent also depend on whether other framework conditions will be in place here. It will not be an easy game to reverse the decline here, but I want to be optimistic in the sense that Europe does have opportunities here.
Now, rapidly changing global dynamics mean that for Europe especially, the area of trade has become increasingly important as a driver of economic growth. What has Bruegel's research revealed?
Yes, I think competition policy should be seen also as a way to trigger growth and to generate more growth. More competition in principle should be good for growth. But of course, there has been very severe criticism by some that competition policy is too tough in Europe and it's unfair to compare to laxer competition enforcement in China.
For multinational companies, today is like playing a football game on a pitch where you have more than one referee and more than one set of rules. Instead, there should be just one set of rules. There should be just one standard, and that would make life much easier for companies that they want to invest in different jurisdictions.
Now, the other big topic in the trade area that came up this year, which has the potential to generate a lot of new jobs, a lot of new wealth creation, is the transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, the so-called TTIP. Our scholar André Sapir has been skeptical as to what can be achieved.
What is feasible at the end of the day, at the end of the process, won't have much economic impact, and what would potentially have lots of economic impact is really not feasible.
Our visiting scholar Supana Karmaka has studied the multilateral trading system, which still is one of the most important pillars of global growth in trade, and is arguing now that after Bali, the WTO is back.
Not to say that the regional deals are off the table or that mega regionals are not interesting anymore or not going to be discussed anymore, but at least WTO has become a serious contender once again as a trade negotiating forum.